Hi, this is Mondays with Maeve. Welcome. I'm so excited to come to you to share the next part in my series of travel wisdom. And this series came about based on all my travels for really the past few years, but when I think back on it, it's actually cumulative, just all the times that I've actually traveled during my shortish period time on this planet. And I just figured I was called to share pieces of wisdom and lessons that I feel have come forward in those travels that I feel like could really serve other people and certainly continue to serve me as I move forward as a continued avid traveler. And I hope they'll serve you too. And it's of no surprise to me that last night I had a really profound dream, which is absolutely related to the topic that I'm going to be covering today, which is about connecting with nature. And some of you probably don't know this, actually most, is I am an equestrian and grew up riding horses and even boarded a Pinto Arabian the ripe age of 15 into my 16th year. And I trained her based on her desperate need to constantly be run around and ridden. And it was one of the most profound experiences that I ever had. And still to this day, it brings me back in connection to my relationship with that animal. And so the horses were the first part of my dream last night, which was I was getting ready to ride, and I'd forgotten my helmet, and I was very much at peace though. It was kind of like something like, oh yeah, that's something I need to get, and everything was very much in flow. And as I was walking to get my helmet, literally the skies just like opened up, and these cascading mountain peaks, snow-covered, they looked like skyscrapers but mountains. It was just unbelievable. And I mean, I've seen amazing mountain ranges, some mountain ranges in the world. You know, we have beautiful mountain ranges here in the US, but obviously in parts of the world like the Swiss Alps and these amazing picos in Spain that I saw recently. I mean, they're just ginormous. And in the dream, they were just like, I became completely almost like transfixed and almost paralyzed by the sight of them. And I just stopped in my tracks and was like completely in awe. And what this kind of like really transmits for me is just the power and inspiration and really like overview of how Mother Nature operates in our world. And it's so funny because I'm actually kind of like mirroring, looking at one of my paintings that I have, which is of Mount Rainier. Maybe I'll just show it to you. Why not? There we go. Oh, you can see my diva light. But yeah, Mount Rainier, which is one of the beautiful mountains I was lucky enough to grow up looking at. And so mountain energy and mountains and Mother Nature have always resembled such an important part of my life and transformation and journey as a person, musician. And one of the things that I feel can be dismissed a lot of the time when we're moving and when we're constantly on the go, when we're busy and we have so many different agendas, is really getting back to like connecting with nature and grounding ourselves in, to me, what is the most important and essential part of our existence here on planet Earth. And a lot of this comes from a variety of reasons, I believe, and some of them I want to share today to try and bring more awareness around pieces of excuses that we give ourselves to not connect with nature. And I believe they're of an unconscious sort. They're not something that we actually are aware of until, we actually bring ourselves to a conscious level and awareness about them. But I think they're always important to kind of like be inquiring and questioning in ourselves, particularly if we're not doing so well, because the truth is that life ebb and flows, right? Life is great and life is maybe not so great just due to circumstances or, life. So, but the one consistent thing, right, is nature and is Mother Earth and our connection to her. And I feel, so a couple different things that came to mind of why we wouldn't, and certainly in my journey, why I wouldn't connect with nature has to do with kind of like three specific things. And they're somewhat connected, but I feel that they're super relevant and very applicable to many different situations. And the first thing is apathy. And that comes from, more of like a medical scientific perspective, based on if you're looking at apathy in muscles. For instance, if you can't use a muscle, if you have surgery, or if you're injured for some reason and you don't have actual access to certain muscle groups or what have you, your muscle becomes apathetic and is not as strong and able to really give all its power and energy to whatever you might need it for. But apathy can be also from an emotional place and a mental place. And this can come from a variety of reasons. It can come from depression. It can come from disappointment. It can come from pain and sorrow and loss. And, just straight up kind of feelings that things are just not going to get better, or, a variety of things. And that's certainly a cause of our environment, and certainly a cause of, how we've grown up to see the world and our perspective. But the thing about allowing for ourselves to stay in an apathetic state is we don't allow ourselves to see the bigger picture, right? So we're not allowing ourselves to really open up and kind of like pull the, zoom out and really see the bigger picture, which for me, Mother Nature does. You're able to see more of like the wide landscape and see from more of a vantage point of the bigger picture. But living in an apathetic state is one of more of a small, like immediate, this is happening to me right now, or this is my current state of being, as opposed to, just using it from a physical analogy, like if someone's injured, saying like, no, I'm going to get better. Like each day is going to get better. Each day I'm going to do a little bit more to increase my physical ability or my, physical healing. And the same goes for emotional and mental perspectives. And to me, plugging into Mother Nature, what I'll get into in the kind of, second part of my thoughts is, a huge solution to this. So apathy, again, not necessarily a choice most of the time, particularly if you're physically unable or disabled, can also feel the same for an emotional, mental position of inability to kind of shift gears. But in the instances where we do have choices about stepping out of an apathetic state, I feel as though this is something that can really serve us. And the second piece is probably pretty obvious, and it's funny. I'm trying not to be ironic because I'm on Facebook Live. Not that I'm on, the internet or I'm on an electronic device, but I'm talking about electronics. And electronics for me is, again, it's an amazing way in which we're able to bond and connect and relate to one another in a way that we haven't before. However, it's also a bit of a double-edged sword where, we're able to have all these connections. We're able to have all these amazing abilities to stay in touch and to tap into a variety of circumstances or environments or cultures and worldviews and communities. At the same time, it keeps us almost in a little bit of a very small view if we're making assumptions, judgments, conclusions about what we're seeing. And I do feel like it can become very much an imprisoned experience as opposed to one of an expanded knowledge way of relating to each other. And to me, the difference of switching from electronics, which is a certain type of energy, to more of an earth energy is something that has to be in balance. And so a lot of what I sense can keep us away from that is if we don't prioritize our usage of electronics. So we don't prioritize, how we're engaging with electronics. And this doesn't just go for obviously social media. This goes for television and, any other YouTube or, I don't need to really list all of them because we all know what they are. But this becomes more of a question of, where are we allowing for ourselves to be impressed upon for not only our worldviews, but also just our life view. And again, bringing it back to how does that relate to Mother Nature and what's real and what's actually tangible and something that we can actually see as, a larger perspective and a larger viewpoint for kind of like a temperature and gauge for us in this world. So that to me is something that can bring us out of the kind of like tangible, real world, and just our relationship with that can be like a very thin line. And so again, tapping into more of like the nature energy to me is informs us more in a way that is more balanced and grounded. And the last thing that I feel we can get into a place of almost not connecting with our earth and our energy space that has to do with nature is our mind. And this is something that's been talked about for a really long time. A lot of, spiritual leaders and, various, influencers who have referenced meditation or stillness or any sort of like physical engagement outside of your mind space is something that can hold true gravity to any piece of the mind that wishes to kind of break down, what might be an individual be faced with, or what we're actually seeing as the truth, or the mind just like loves to feast upon stories, and left to its own devices will just like run wild and rampant. And I certainly affiliate this with the ego, and the ego is like constantly wanting attention. It's constantly wanting, information. It's constantly wanting like validation, and it's constantly wanting a piece of truth that it's trying to, basically allow for itself to exist. But the thing about the mind is like, it's not really, to me, really functioning on the level of peace and quiet and groundedness and truth and like, deep wisdom like the earth and like Mother Nature, based from the fact that it's not really like connected to so many other varieties of what our actual experience is. And so when we are able to like reconnect with, to me in my travels, when I've connected with like the forest and the rivers and the sun and the stars and the moon and the cycles of nature and animals and a variety of pieces that I find very mystical and magical, this is something where my mind isn't engaging. There isn't something that it's like, oh, look at that. That means this, or this must mean that. It's just brings a sense of calm and ease and quiet to the chatter of the mind, which I think just runs rampant so much of the time. And it's not to say that the mind isn't something that is of great value. Obviously, it's brought our society and culture and technology to to certain heights and great places that we're able to experience things that generations before us haven't. But still the consistency and the constant is earth, right? If it all kind of like went away, we would still have this place. And to me, it's really a question of how connected are we with reality? How connected are we with the magnitude of our position in this place? And so much of the time, it's easy to think what things are really important. And certainly, if I go backwards in terms of, the mind, electronics versus earth energy, and then apathy, it's like, what really is important in this moment, in this particular time. And to me, it's about presence. It's about being in this moment, being in, this space, which is all we have. And that keeps coming up for me many, many different ways when I experience loss, when I've seen people pass away, when there have been circumstances which were incredible or kind of like miraculous. And that, one thing can change immediately if we're just able to kind of like hold strong in our present moment. And as opposed to obsessing about like it's never like the future or the past. If we're thinking about what used to be or we're thinking about what couldn't be in the future, like those are just like torture zones. And to me, nature brings that, like it brings us to that place. For me, because we get better perspective, right? Because if I'm climbing, the heights of a mountain and I see that, I could face death, or I could face injury, or I could face almost defeat in nature, I'm brought to the present moment of like, I can make a choice now to keep climbing, to keep going, to persevere and continue to challenge myself in this moment, to not have those things come to pass, whether or not they do. And it also just gets one out of your head. It just gets you out of, what I feel like a lot of us get trapped in, which is the ego self, the ego state. And I am certainly not excused from this. And it's something that has always been a very big constant for me. And I noticed that when I have stepped away from stepping into nature and stepping into connecting with the outdoors and the ground and the earth and the trees and animals, that certain pieces of my mind go nuts. And so to me, it's particularly when there's just so many other things that are going on at such high velocities in our human experience, we can gather a certain amount of like wisdom